everybody, and welcome to tonight's live stream. I am incredibly excited to introduce tonight's guest. His name is Vikas Srivastava, and he's been a professional educator for over 20 years. His experience extends from preschool through college in various roles as a counselor, teacher, administrator, and consultant. Throughout his roles in diverse communities, he's consistently advocated and facilitated social emotional well-being, creative competence, and nonviolent social change. More recently, he's developed frameworks for consistently integrating mindfulness, trauma sensitivity, restorative practices, and diversity, equity, inclusion for all scholars and staff for K through 12, as well as nonprofit and for-profit organizations. Vikas earned his BA at UC San Diego in sociology with an emphasis on poverty, education, and ethnic politics. He earned an MED at Harvard with an emphasis on school design, diversity, and race politics. He currently serves as HR Employee Relations and Mindfulness Director at Legacy Early College in Greenville, South Carolina. And here he is, ladies and gentlemen. Just I wanted that reading that sounds kind of cold. Vikas and I have been in conversations for a long time. There was an article, I think it was in one of the Greenville newspapers, and it talked about him being director of mindfulness at Legacy Early College. And so I reached out to him, and that was probably about 3 years ago. And he and I have kept in touch over the years because he's one of the first people I've ever heard of in the state of South Carolina to be a director of mindfulness. And we talked a lot, just had a lot in common and a lot of similar goals for what we kind of envision in terms of schools. So welcome and thank you so much for your time tonight, Vikas.
Thank you for having me, Todd. What can I say? You're always at the cutting edge of educational reform, and I'm honored to just be in the lineup with the people that you affiliate with and present. It's truly an honor to be here.
Well, yeah, you're one of the first people I thought about when we created the Center for Educator Wellness and Learning. Someone that I really want to tap into your expertise, your experience, and felt like people would have a really great experience just learning from you, because I've learned so much from you just over the course of these few years. And so I'm just going to kind of pass the baton to you, and let's talk about the elephant in the room for just a minute, though, because this is the first I did last week after the events that happened in Uvalde, Texas. I did a mindfulness session, and I didn't really want to unpack any of the politics or anything around that. I just wanted to give people a space to sort of process what happened. And so since this is the first time we've done anything like this since that happened, I just wanted to give you sort of a moment, just if there's anything you wanted to share about that, or how that's going to connect to what you're talking about tonight.
Yeah, so it's a lot there, and I think it has everything to do with what we're talking about today. And it broke me down again. I've worked in low-income communities for quite some time. I've worked in gang territory often. And I don't know about the rest of us who do this work, but you never get used to young people dying. No. It's never like you get used to it. Every time it happens, it breaks you down. It doesn't matter the cause. And so actually, with that being said, I would like to invite the practice and take a moment. Whatever the children are, especially at that age, at elementary school, and really all the way through high school, whatever they are, they're innocent. They truly are innocent. And it's hard. They are truly trying to bring out the best in themselves and the best in us. And they're just innocent. That's all I can say, is they're innocent. They're innocent. They're innocent of so much. You know, we can get into the politics, but out of everything that we will say in debate, the children are innocent. So I'll invite everyone into a practice just to take time. Um, I'll invite you to close your eyes. You don't have to, of course. Just take a moment to notice your breathing and allow your body to breathe any way that it wants to. Deep breaths, shallow breaths, long or short. Just notice your breathing in your body wherever you can feel it the most. Maybe your stomach or your chest, maybe your mouth or your nose. And notice how your body wants to breathe. Take a deep breath and hold it. And looking down at the ground, gently open your eyes as you breathe out. So, Todd, I have a question for you. Tell me what's working for you right here, right now, today, since we spoke last. What's working for you?
I tend to process my stress through talking. So having conversations with friends um, and family members, trying to talk through it, kind of my feelings on it. And I've purposefully avoided watching the news. I feel like I know enough. I mean, I do check a little bit each day, but I don't dive into and spend hours watching the news because I don't. I'm aware of what happened. I feel like I don't need to keep sort of reliving it, perseverating on it. My practice helps. Coming back to the present moment, focusing on what I need to do, trying to focus on the work that I do, which is, uh, you know, hopefully will be consequential. Hopefully will move us to a better place. So focusing on that work.
And
And
was there any conversation in particular with anyone that brought you peace or hope or inspiration or a phrase or a word?
Not yet. I would say honestly, right now it's still so raw to think about what happened. I think it's going to take me a while longer to work through all of that. I have to absorb it kind of slowly and pace myself, because if I spend too much time really digging in, thinking about it, it's just overwhelming right now.
So, what is working? Is how's you seem very comfortable right now. Like, is your chair comfortable?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really appreciate the technology you have. It's like, because I know you are going to mix this down. You've got the right mic. You know, you've got everything. It seems like you're kind of in your place. Like this is Todd's spot. This is this is Todd's gig. You know, and our technology's working. I think you can hear me clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and we're on time. We made this happen. We picked this date, and we get to talk to each other. So part of part of everything that's going on, there's there's so much. So let's start with this idea of peace versus nonviolence. I think first and foremost, we need to talk about violence. It's not working. And when we talk about violence not working, we also have to talk about this culture of confronting violence with violence. So, in any way, in any form of aggression, and so when we truly understand the nature of violence, then maybe we can somehow address it. We can somehow start to untangle it.
Yeah.
It's easy to get angry. It's easy to get aggressive. Those of us who fight for peace, we march with our fists in the air, yelling slogans. Right? So when we understand violence, I see violence as an energy. Everything can be broken down into energy. If we see violence as an energy, then energy can't be created or destroyed. And that's what we notice with violence. That whenever we look at violence, there's a precursor to the violence.
Yes.
It's traveling. Right? So there was violence against the shooter. Then the shooter commits violence against these students and families. And those who lived now have a seed of that violence. And now where will that violence go? Where will that anger go, that aggression go? Will it go towards, if the shooter lived, would it go towards maximum punishment? Where will it go? So energy can't be created or destroyed, but it can be transformed. When we look at nonviolence versus peace, so I don't know how else to explain it except to translate it in my mother tongue. And in my mother tongue, peace is shanti, and nonviolence is ahimsa. So peace, I find when I close my eyes. It's a state of mind. Whatever's going on in the world, I find my peace. Nonviolence is different because nonviolence, even in the English word non-violence, comes from ahimsa. Ahimsa, so himsa is violence, and is the negation of violence. So at the root of nonviolence is violence. So actually nonviolence is very different. So when we deal with certain events like you were describing, okay, I don't want to watch extra news unnecessarily. Watching it caused me overwhelmed. That's finding your peace. But at the same time, you're engaging in discussion with me now. That's nonviolence. So in nonviolence, violence is at the core. We actually have to be aware of the violence to be nonviolent. How can we be nonviolent if we don't know what we're confronting and resisting? We have to be aware of violence. And so this awareness and the constant confrontation of it is nonviolence. And then when we see how nonviolence is practiced as ahimsa in our culture, then we see the transformation of violence. So in that transformation, if whatever I do to someone else, whatever thoughts or actions I have towards someone else, I have to drink the poison first. If I squash an ant, before I squash the ant or the spider or the cockroach, there is I digest a seed of poison, of anger first, and then I do it. So whatever we're thinking against somebody else, justified or not, we're also drinking the poison. So in nonviolence, in ahimsa, we are not only transforming the violence, we're actually transforming the oppressor. So the idea in like the British colonization of India was to actually kill the Britishers with love, to truly say, you will, this is not me above you and you above me. This is for humanity. This is for all of us. And that's the difference in nonviolence. It's not passive. It's very active, and it's the confrontation of violence. It's not ignoring it. That takes us to peace of mind. Not that that's a negative thing. We have to have peace of mind. If we don't have peace of mind, we can't be nonviolent. So peace of mind is the precursor to having the strength and resilience to be nonviolent. Right? So that goes very deep, even against ourselves. Because we have to be nonviolent with ourselves. We have to have compassion for ourselves. We have to accept where we're at and what we can and cannot do. So when you talk about this idea of like not wanting to be overwhelmed, we talk about that overwhelm is the element of water. Water is what overwhelms, right? And so on the one hand, we have the element of water, which is overwhelming, which means I no longer have a container, water spilling all over my feelings, my emotions. I can't contain it. And on the other side, opposite of water, we have the element of fire, which is the intensity, right? And so we have to be very careful because, on the one hand, fire catches very quickly. It becomes uncontrollable very quickly. You don't play with fire. Don't play with fire. That's why we say don't play with fire. On the other hand, the curse and the blessing of water is that it takes on any form very quickly. The minute the heat turns up, the water boils. We can boil water and freeze water using just household technology. We don't need a special laboratory for it or anything special. So those are the two opposites. We have fire, which is intensity, which then just affects water immediately, overwhelm. And then we can, that's just kind of almost that cycle that we talked about, which I call disorientation. It's a cycle of rumination, not, thinking of the same thing over and over, intensity, which is often coupled with physical intensity, resistance, right? So often I talk about being resistant to different ideas, but in the same way, if you notice, there's a resistance in you, a resistance to talk about it, a resistance to the news. There's just, and it's a healthy resistance, but there's a resistance, a protective resistance. And
Right.
all this can lead to impulsive action. So in this resistance, intensity, rumination cycle, we have to kind of push, and that's where the practice comes in. So the first part of that is simply to observe, wow, this is where I'm at, and that's what you did. So you actually went into your practice. You observed. You're like, okay, here I am. I can't stop thinking about it. I'm getting intense.
Yeah.
You actually you voiced your resistance. I didn't point it out. You pointed it out.
Yeah.
So you went into your practice of observing awareness, and you received your feelings. You're like, this is how I'm feeling. I'm going to respect how I'm feeling. I don't need to challenge that with watching more news and having more conversations before I'm ready. I'm going to respect my feelings. I'm going to receive my feelings. I'm going to feel it. I'm going to receive it. And so with all those three pieces, you move forward with intention. This is who Todd is going to be. Right? So that is your practice. And so in the mindfulness piece, it's moving from a focus on what I can't control to a focus of what I can control. You can't control the news. You can't control what happened. We can't change the past. But you can control your stability so that me and you can have this conversation and listen to each other.
That's right. I've been thinking a lot about trying to break out of this. The issues that led up to this event and how we respond to it are incredibly complex, and I think we tend to oversimplify it on social media, like what the solutions should be or what the causes were. But I think I've written a little bit about this, and I'd love for you to talk about it. And you're kind of getting at it now, which is we need to have an honest examination of all of the causes and conditions that led to this. What we tend to do is put in a placeholder and just say this was an act of evil, which I'm not gonna push back on that. But when you stop there, when you just label this or label the person, and you don't take the time to go back and really dig into what led to this, then we never really get anywhere, because it always seems like we're just quick to have a judgment and a label on whatever happens, and then without really figuring out the causes and conditions that lead to these things. And it's like an oversimplification of what is likely to have been a complex series of factors that led to this, or leads to any kind of tragic situation like this?
Yeah, I'm gonna, as I'm hearing you, as I'm listening to you, what's coming to me, and I'm gonna think out loud right now. We're just gonna do this. We're gonna go for it. Two things come to me. One is the glorification of violence, and two is the lack of capacity to express ourselves. As I'm saying that, I'm also thinking of situations as a parents and educators, whether we're teachers or administrators. Ultimately, we will force control when we lose control. So part of the mindful framework, right, is reorienting from what I can't control, reorienting to what I can control. And when I do the practice and I find that stability and peace of mind with awareness, right? With awareness, receiving the feelings, receiving the situation, I find myself in a capacity to let go, as we are right now. So, like right now, me and you have capacity to let go of control. We're both being vulnerable. We're in a place where, like, okay, like we're going to do this. When we suffer from not being able to differentiate between what we can and cannot control, we often use aggression to solve it. So when we have a student that's not doing what we want to do, or a child who's not doing what we want to do, we slap down the ultimatum. Whether it's in school suspension, sitting in the office, I will make you suffer. So how does this really teach the students and the youth how to act? When I don't get my way, then I must use this. This is the next step. So when you couple glorification of violence with the lack of emphasis, what is the word? What is the word for over 100 years of formal education, over hundreds of years of wars and deaths in this day and age, that we still prioritize literacy, content, advanced mathematics and science that we may never use over social emotional learning?
Right.
If we don't learn to get along with each other, we're all going to die with Harvard degrees. Right? So what is the word? Is disappointment really doesn't cover it. So with that lack of capacity to express ourselves functionally, and then as adults, what are we modeling? We're in constant crisis mode. It's right. Yeah. So a school shooting happened. And before this, the Capitol riots happened. And before this, George Floyd happened. And before this, COVID happened. And we're just in constant crisis mode. And we act as if like racism never happened before 2020. And we're acting as if a school shooting never happened before last week. It's like when the previous administration threw out the plans for a pandemic. And we're all criticizing them, but what are we doing? Where's our plan? How many years? How often does this have to happen for us to say, hey, this is the plan? When crisis hits, we break. All classes stop and we go into restorative circle. We model to the students, how do we handle crisis?
Right.
Because when we can handle it on the outside, maybe we can handle it on the inside.
This is what I've been trying to advocate for, which is none of the things that we measure on a standardized test, which seems to be the most precious thing we have in education. Is how we're measured. It's how we're told whether we're doing a good job or not. But none of that matters. If you're mentally unwell, if you're physically unwell, if you're socially unwell, none of that matters. Like you alluded to. I think about my kids, and my son's taken all kinds of AP tests, and he got a 1540 on his SAT. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying I don't care about that. If he's riddled with anxiety, if he doesn't know how to handle crisis, if he has no resilience, if he's depressed, he's physically sick all the time because he's not taking care of himself. And because those things aren't measured, nobody seems to care about them. They just get put by the wayside. And I know that the humans in the building see that. The educators see this. They want to help, but then they're told, we're going to measure your performance on these benchmarks and on these goals. And yeah, if you want to throw in a little bit of stuff about kindness this week, that'd be great. I don't know how we convince people to get this right first, the social emotional part right first. And then actually the byproduct of that is kids will probably do better on these tests anyway.
So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on standardized tests, but I'm going to say my piece. The son of Fela Kuti, Femi Kuti, famous Afrobeat superstar, said, "There are two places where money and business do not belong: medicine and education." So standardized testing has nothing to do with what we think kids need to succeed in life. And let's be clear, it has nothing to do with college, because if it did, we wouldn't take SATs. Right? So we take standardized tests on one side and SATs on the other, and all the rich kids get SAT prep because actually high school doesn't prepare you for the SAT, which is the college entrance exam. Right? So now we ask, what is standardized testing for? It's to sell. It's to sell curriculum and textbooks. And I'm sure there's lobbyists who make sure that that doesn't ever die. It's all about the money. Because there's no other reason. It has nothing to do with college entrance. I mean, doing well in college means critical thinking, essay writing, a base level of mathematics, science, and the sciences. Base level of history, because you're going to go back into your gen ed and they're going to teach you a bunch of stuff all over again. Critical thinking is the key of it. So all these details on the standardized test, actually, what do they lead to? And then why are we taking the SAT? And why is there SAT prep? There should only be one test to focus on, and that's the SAT. And even that's leaving us soon, because that's irrelevant as well. So it's all about money.
Right.
It's an industry. Number one.
So. I wrote something, $1.7 billion a year America spends on just testing.
Yes.
And when you divide that, if you divided that and gave that to every teacher, it'd be $500, a permanent raise for each teacher of $500, or it would build, I forgot how many schools. I think it was 100 schools per year that you could build with that money. And it's and my argument is that any educator who's doing their job properly is doing formal and informal assessments all the time, and can tell you where those students are and whether they're behind and where they need extra help with in terms of the instruction. The test only exists to placate education policy leaders, legislators, community members, but they're getting an inaccurate picture of what the quality of public schools are like, because they're judging it based upon this one narrow set of tests on one particular day. And it's not authentic to what kids really need to know to be successful anyway.
The lesson of the test is, one, tests are meant to trick you. Therefore, education ultimately is there to trick you. It's there to make sure you fail more than succeed. And two, that everything's a game. There's no purpose. There's no meaning. There's no passion. It's a game. Learn to take the test. We say that all the time. It's a game. Learn to give your teacher what your teacher wants to get the A. This teacher wants it this way. That teacher wants it that way. The test wants it this way. Learn to play the game.
Right.
And then we want to blame the generation. They have no purpose and passion.
And one of my favorite authors, Neil Postman, talked about how we really don't have any narratives for young people to sort of look to, around which they can kind of be inspired in terms of their learning. Because right now, like you said, it's a game. And the students like my son who understand how the game works, that if I go through these hoops and I pass these AP exams, I do well on the SAT, I get to go to this particular college. And then hopefully there's going to be material payoffs for me down the road. So they see those connections, but the students that don't see those connections or don't value those connections, they're left with nothing to inspire them to to do anything in school. And the narrative right now for educators is we've got to perform well in these tests, which is why they perseverate and obsess over data and looking at the scores and how are we going to improve it? How are we going to maximize these scores next year? How are we going to improve upon what we've done? And the problem with all of that is when that's set up, there's nothing for young people really to inspire them, and they're missing that, I think. And I think that's leading to a lot of problems. I think that is, I don't have the research in front of me, but I do think that's leading to issues of um, drug addiction and other sociological problems. Because if you don't have anything to look up to say, hey, I can be a part of something bigger than myself, or I can be a part of a movement, or I can see how I connect to the planet, I see how I connect to my community. If it's just about grades and SAT scores, and I'm not that great, my grades aren't very good, and I can't seem to quite be able to do well in the SAT, then your self-worth is like, well, I guess I'm not valued because this is what they're saying. I mean, look at the award ceremonies. I would ask people, look at what your award ceremonies were at your schools. What were they about? Because the award ceremonies that I've seen are all about who got A's and B's, who had perfect attendance, who got this score on the SAT, I didn't see a lot about who's kind, who's serving, who's
Well, and recognition in general, just recognition. I mean, the fact that we're seeking human recognition. I mean, our whole life is human recognition. I have a degree. I have an MED. I am the president. I am the co-founder. I got this award. I mean, it's just humans recognizing humans. I mean, and let's take this even further. Because there is a paradigm here, and it has everything to do with diversity, equity, inclusion. Because the paradigm here is that, are we truly being diverse if we are not truly encouraging all ways of living? Because there are narratives. There's activists, there's indigenous elders who live in the trees and live with the earth. We're not. That is not a model of success. So now equity and inclusion is who's getting into the Ivy League, and who's going to be the next CEO, and who's going to have money. So we diversity, equity, inclusion into what? Where's the diversity there? We're actually really not respecting all forms of ways in living, because there absolutely are narratives. They just don't fit the college driven material narrative.
Right. And the problem is too that where I see this happening, and this is going to be a little controversial, but where I see a few scattered places where they are adopting those narratives, like how you connect with the planet. We're going to really emphasize your inner life. Those seem to only happen at private schools, because public schools aren't allowed to move into that territory because they're under so much pressure because of the accountability of the standardized test. So if I start a school that's a public school and I want to go into that and say, hey, our narrative is really not going to be about, I mean, academics are a part of it, but our main focus is going to be your inner life, the environment, living peacefully, living at one with the earth, living well with other people, artistic endeavors. But the problem is that then if my test scores aren't good, I'm going to be shut down. Even in the charter movement, I'll have my charter removed if I don't live up to a certain expectation with those test scores.
But the track record is that, why does mindfulness support academics? It does. So, I always say, if a teacher teaches special ed, I'm gonna hire them. Because if you can teach special ed, you can teach anything. It's best practices. So when we teach the foundation, everything above it flourishes. with peace of mind, with a connection to the planet, with a connection to the earth, with an inner purpose, everything flourishes because we're doing what we're meant to do. It's like the ikigai framework, the Japanese framework, right? What am I meant to do? What can I get paid? Because I'm offering something that I am meant to do. That is true self-worth. So now the money is actually confirming my self-worth, not taking it away. The recognition, though it wasn't asked for, is confirming a deeper sense of being on my path. I accept it in all humility, not arrogance, entitlement, and I wasn't working towards it.
Yeah, and I would say that what we are seeing, and we've kind of covered some of this, all of the things that we're seeing in terms of these different crises that are taking place, I think a lot of it, and I want to oversimplify this, but a lot of it stems from uh, our misalignment, being out of alignment with what our inner needs are, what our brain needs, what our spirits need. We're out of alignment. And when you're out of alignment, especially when you're far out of alignment, there's so many things that can go wrong. And people, Thoreau said most men lead lives of quiet desperation. And I think it's because they're alienated from themselves, not aligned with any type of purpose that resonates with deep inside their soul. It's okay. So I was told I got to have a career. This one's good. They'll make a lot of money. So even the students who are successful by society standards, a lot of them aren't living in alignment. And I think this we've got to figure out how the public education system can come back in alignment, because I think that's leading to teacher recruitment and retention issues. I know you, as an HR person, you're acutely aware of how few people are going into the profession and how few people there are out there. The pool is shrinking. People are quitting. We've got record numbers of vacancies because teachers feel out of alignment, because we see the whole system's out of alignment. We feel out of alignment and we just don't want to be a part of it anymore.
Yeah, so I think I want to get into crisis management. And the reason is I think one of the biggest lessons of having we've talked, I've found enlightenment, we've talked about this intense experience that I had. But one of the biggest lessons of that is that everything changes. So even that state of enlightenment, it changed. Like I got caught up in life, when I was doing a 10-day retreat, then I got in this state. And then when as I got back into home life and the stresses and just driving in my car, having to be on time in certain places, things changed. And I kind of got depressed about that. So even when we find sense of purpose, everything changes. We lose purpose because that's the cycle, to have purpose and to lose purpose because that's what gives us new purpose. The same purpose gets old, right? Whatever it is even if it doesn't change, we change. I don't want the same purpose. That's like having my favorite dessert every night. I'm sick of it. So I kind of want to show a few graphics
Yeah,
to really tie in, because I think for educators and for families, I really think this crisis management and being proactive for crisis management, meaning that we're always preparing for micro and macro crisis in a way that creates true resilience, in a way that it develops capacity to be aware of the crisis, embrace the crisis, and move through the crisis, right? So it's not like a depressing thing of we're always in crisis. It's just like, oh, and here we are,
right.
right? Um, so I'm going to do something a little untraditional. I've got a slide deck, but I'm actually going to just kind of skip through it and hit things. So I apologize in advance for the disorganization. I want to do what's relevant and effective, and I'm
Yeah.
not going to go according to plan.
No worries.
So I guess I will share my screen.
Okay.
Um, so let's see, share. Oop. Okay, hold on a second. So, okay.
while you're getting that up, I'll just share with people that they want to learn more about the resources that we're offering. They can go to cool.us. That's cewl.us. We will be posting this session on that website. We've got a lot of other really great resources on that website as well.
Okay, so let me see. I apologize. Let me try this one more time.
And if you haven't seen Pete Stone's video today, it was really great. So,
oh, I did see that. That was good. I really enjoyed that.
Really, really great.
All right, here we go. I'm going to share this. There's no audio, so I tried to keep it simple. I'm just going to say that part of the intensity that we're feeling in these times, and here, let me go to presentation mode, is even though we feel the lack of inclusion, the lack of equity, our expectations have actually risen. We actually expect more equity and more inclusion. And so the unprecedentedness that we're feeling is actually that risen expectation of that it should be equal and inclusive. And the divide, in my opinion, that we're feeling is that we're really being asked to choose. I felt before the previous administration, presidential administration, people could kind of sit in the middle and they could say, I'm not racist, but I don't have to be anti-racist. Now we're asked to choose, which side are you on? You have to make a decision. You don't get to walk the middle ground and be this kind of have peace, right? Where you don't get to be peaceful and say you're being nonviolent when truly you're not confronting the violence. So like I said, I'm going to move through this. So this is the framework I wanted to show. And I'm using you, Todd, as kind of the example, because what you shared is this, what we're calling distress intolerance and negativity bias. So distress, I call it intolerance, is, how much distress can we take? And so at some point we reach our max. There's a lot of folks who, in the last 8 years, 6 years have stopped watching the news because it hit our distress tolerance, like no more. I can't take it anymore. On the other hand, social media has this negativity bias. It's like, we want to see what's wrong. The news has always had this. And so then there's the 4 characteristics that lead to what I call auto disorientation. And it's auto because it goes on automatic, unless you do a practice, which is what you engaged in, Todd. The key to distress intolerance and negativity bias is it focuses on everything we can't control. And so we feel disempowered. And that's the cycle. So disempowerment is what's going to drive someone to shoot up a school. That's someone who lacks so much control. Here, and now I'm going to show you I got control. Right? So in any time we feel disempowered, when we can't receive the disempowerment, we act it out in over-controlling, right? And being overly aggressive because we're trying to control something we cannot control. And so again, there's just kind of the cycle of it. Like I said, I'm going to push through. So now here's kind of the big whole thing, and we're moving fast. This is going to be something for you guys to reach out to me or come in on another webinar. So in this model, this is where I was talking about moving from being fixated to what I can't control, reorienting to what I can control, and then having that capacity to let go of control. But the reason I wanted to show this is when we understand the cycle of crisis, is that when we find ourselves in the 3rd column and like everything just happens to be working out, life brings us into that 1st column. That's a cycle. We don't get to stay in the 3rd column because something knocks us into that 1st column, whether it's a death in the family or a car accident or some tragedy or even something minor or even something unrelated to us directly, but like the school shooting, like that throws us into that auto disintegration again. And when we get there, the question is, how long do we stay there? And that's what we need to be teaching our staff, our families, and our students, is not to avoid it. Not that if you do this magic practice, it never happens, or if you get education, or if you get money, or if you're protected, you'll never end up here. You will. Something will bring you here. And the question is, how long do you stay there? What is your practice that's going to bring you to that second column? And it doesn't have to be mindfulness, it could be anything that brings you into that place where you can receive your feelings and move forward with intention, right? And not be impulsive. And just to be clear, we reach auto disintegration when we fall in love. It's not always a negative thing. When I'm in love, I do all of those things in that first column, and I'm impulsive,
Mm-hmm.
right? So so this is so what came out is when we had what we had going on was COVID, and we had the presidency, that presidential whatever administration, which was I'm not gonna judge it, and I'm not gonna judge folks on who support it or don't support it, but I will say it bred intensity. That whatever you want, however you feel about it, it was constant intensity. Whether it was the tweets or the messages or whatever, like I'm not really sure what Biden's having for dinner right now. There's no intensity around this administration. It's not like a daily what has happened now. We're not like it's not a soap opera show. So with COVID, that administration, then you had George Floyd, then you had the Capitol riots. We had a wildfire, and we had overwhelm. We had the element of water, we had the element of fire, fire hitting water, water overwhelming, right? Crying, tears, emotions all over the place, and no containers. Maximum distress, intolerance, negativity, bias, we had it all. So, what I witnessed at the school and nonprofits and different organizations, and even in the family, particularly in the organizations, we had outside facilitators come in to do our DEI training. Now, these facilitators had the content about equity, justice, all of it. But the issue I felt was when they left, we were more divided. We were more educated, but we were more divided. And so we were divided, and then there was folks who felt shame. There was folks who felt immense anger. And I kind of was thinking we're kind of throwing, like, this is not working. Like, ultimately, we're not going to be forgiving. I mean, we could say forgiving. We're not going to be like, just let it go, like it's okay. We're all no. We do have to have social justice, but how can we have that with humanity? So when I talk about restorative practices, when I restore something, I'm a DJ. So like when I remix something, I restore it. So I think about when I remix a song, the first thing I do about the song is I say, what's the essence of the song? Is it a hook? Is it a bass line? Like, what is the essence of this song that if I let go of that, I let go of it all? Then I look at the song and I say, okay, now that I got the essence, maybe it's a bass line or a hook. I say, what is not kind of really up to date anymore? What do I got to bring up? Do I got to put in a beat? Do I got to put in something here? Do I got to kind of do a little repetition? Do I got to remix it? And so what I do is I take something that had value but is no longer working as well as it could have, and I get rid of the parts that aren't working out. I save what has value and I restore it, just like a piece of furniture, a pair of clothes, a car, right? That's what restorative means. So we need to really look at what has value. We restore what has value. If it doesn't have value, I'll just throw it away. It becomes dispensable, right? So another discussion is, do teachers have value? Are they dispensable? Do we just let them go? So when we talk about restorative dialogue, it's saying, okay, let me look at this DEI piece. And let me look at what needs to happen. What's the essence here that I can't throw away, but what's not quite working? What's breaking us apart? Because I want to value the humanity. When folks of privilege come to the table for a DEI training, there needs to be a little bit of appreciation or at least acknowledgement that they're at the table. Because if they're off the table, where are we now? Now, where are we? They're off the table. And that happens. I see it over and over. People don't want to go back to the DEI training. They feel shame. They feel hurt. They feel anger. They accept it. Okay, what you're saying is right, but they don't want to come back. It's not, they're not good. It's hard for them to come back to the table. I get it. With discomfort comes growth. But constructive discomfort gives you growth. Destructive discomfort just breaks you in half. So, where is true resilience? Is in developing the flexibility and awareness to grow that capacity to embrace that on both sides of it. And that's where the restorative dialoguing and preventative ongoing crisis management takes place. So in this restorative dialogue, what we did is we took that very basic idea, restorative practices, you've got the circle. The issue with the restorative practices, you always start off with what's wrong. So from a trauma perspective, if you start with what's wrong, like me and you, like if we just start there, we kind of start off in the gutter. We start off with intensity. We start off in looking at what's wrong, what's not working, and what I don't have control of. We start off in a place of disempowerment just by us taking that moment to meditate, find our peace, and talk about the technology and how grateful I am to be able to sit with you and talk with you. I reorganize my biology real quick to a place of empowerment.
Yeah.
Then the circle maintains itself. You've got those restorative kind of pieces in there. And so the opening routine focuses on what's working. It's just kind of a personal empowerment piece. And then you move through protocols, and there's kind of specific protocols, basic stuff. You talk in order. No one talks over each other. You don't say you or your, and you use guided questions. And usually what I will do is I'll start off with what's working. Then I'll go into what's working but could work better. And then we get into what's broken. And then after we get out of what's broken, the closing ritual is usually refocusing on what I can control. So what is something that someone said that I heard that resonated with me? What is an action that I can take coming out of this discussion? Right? And so even though we get down in it, we make sure that we bring everyone back out of it. Now, the key to this is that these circles are happening. Like at the school, I say it should be happening twice a month. In families, I say once a week. With couples, once a week. Because what happens is we don't want to have a circle. We don't want to teach our kids we only communicate when there's a problem.
Right.
If we're ongoing communicating, then we're constantly checking in into each other. And with this system, we're creating a container to have uncomfortable and intense dialogue. And so we can address things as they come up. We can receive our feelings. We can share with it. We can start to create a process of maintenance. And that's what I'm really advocating for. And the frustrating part right now is we're in constant crisis management. We're constantly reacting to crisis versus having restorative stuff in circle so that when crisis happens and all the classrooms have to break into a circle to process the fact that children their age in a building that looks just like this were just shot, we can do it because we're used to it. The teachers are used to it. The kids are used to it. They know the protocols. They get into circle, and we start to process these really difficult feelings. And we're not learning circle for the first time because we've made it a part of the culture to be restorative on a daily, monthly, weekly basis.
Unfortunately, what I see though, that's beautiful. What I'm seeing though is people want to avoid conflict, so they just sweep everything under the rug. Or they just go onto their corner of social media and talk with their people. And then if there's any interaction, it's just like it devolves into name calling and that kind of thing. So you can even look at the talk over gun control on social media over the past week. It just automatically let's polarize into camps. And it becomes really an unproductive conversation. Whereas I think like what you're suggesting is if we could get together and go through that framework and say, what is working? What does seem to help? What's working? And kind of go through that framework. It's the problem is that it seems to me the problem is that there's two types of people, either people that just want to bury their head in the sand and not talk about it because it's controversial and I just don't want to deal with the tension. Mm-hmm. So they just want to just sweep that and just kind of go back to, let me just post about my recipe for whatever.
Yeah.
And then there's other people, and I just admitted at the beginning that's kind of what I've been doing to a degree. Um, and then there's other people that are just so clinging and so attached to whatever their viewpoint is that they just want that to be heard.
So, a couple of things. One, the benefit of having worked at Legacy is I've gotten to Legacy Early College in Greenville is I've gotten to work with everyone from kindergartners through high school and staff, and it works. Why does it work? Because when you go to an amateur masseuse, that amateur says, "Where does it hurt?" You say, "It hurts right here," and they take their hand and they just start going at it, and your whole body gets tense. It's like making it worse. So there's value to respecting when we start to practice nonviolence with ourselves, we start to love ourselves, we start to have compassion and kindness for ourselves, then we start to understand it for each other. So we at all times, in all states of mind and in any situation, are constantly doing what we truly believe is best for us. Even if it's not good for us, even if everyone else could say, "You're killing yourself," you're like, "Yeah, but you know what? This is what's going to give me peace right now." And in your mind, you are doing what you think is best. So that person, so I've done circles where people can pass and they'll pass like halfway through. They'll pass the whole first circle. And this is why you have to do it over and over again, because over time, they have to go through their own process of unraveling. I don't know how tight they're raveled up, but over time, I guarantee it because of my experience. I can tell you, if not the second time, then the third time. And usually it's by the second, but let's say even by the third time, they'll start to join in because they see the safe space. And that's where the protocols come in. We don't have time to get into the absolute nitty. This is its own like webinar where we just talk about that. But when you create that container, you're also saying it's okay for you to be quiet. Like that's okay. Like you unravel at your pace of unraveling. And that's where the facilitator also not only allows people that comfort, but they're also taking questions and driving them very kind of strategically. So, there's a couple of you start to see core themes. One theme is constantly making peace with what I can and cannot control.
Right.
That's a theme. Another theme, self-worth. In fact, I will say everything goes down to self-worth. If we had self-worth, we wouldn't hurt people. We wouldn't be racist. We wouldn't be homophobic. We wouldn't be sexist. We wouldn't have corporate greed. We wouldn't need recognition. All the evils come down to a lack of self-worth, in my opinion. So normally when you're doing circle, you just start, kind of the core themes and you can kind of sort of direct it towards that. And you can get deep, but softly. What I would say, embrace discomfort, grow with ease.
Yeah.
Right, like so when you do yoga you should be able to smile and breathe. If you're crying, like that's not it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, one of the things I've learned recently, I've read a couple of books. There's one called No Bad Parts. One of the things that I'm learning about is how, as children, we have to learn to deal with our vulnerability. And all of us learn to deal with that vulnerability. And how do we make ourselves feel safe in different ways? And then we develop those habits, and then we get into adulthood, and we've sort of solidified this sort of shell, and each of us have a different kind of shell based upon how we were raised and what we did to deal with vulnerability. And I think that we're largely blind to that, and we have a hard time understanding that when other people have very different ways of how they manage their vulnerability and what they experienced throughout their childhood. So someone who is really clinging to a gun and says, "I want to keep this AR-15," you have no right. You have to dig deep. Like, what is that about? What is that about? Is it really about the Second Amendment, or is it really about that's a way they manage their feelings of being vulnerable, is arming themselves? I mean, I'm not saying that's how everybody who has a gun feels, but I do think that's probably occurs for a lot of people. And it's hard for me, who didn't develop that type of coping mechanism. It's hard for me to understand it. So I'm like, well, why would you want your gun so much?
I think you can go back to kind of the base of I refer to trauma as anything that triggers a reaction. So I'm using a very broad. We got micro traumas and macro traumas. And I'm not trying to devalue or make other types of traumas feel insignificant. But when we look at trauma, the baseline: fight, flight, freeze. There's those of us who are going to fight. There's those of us who are going to run away. I'm not coming to circle. And those of us are going to freeze. They're going to sit in circle and say nothing. So, yeah, I mean, this is where we just have to work the circle and create a different way, a different strategy of dealing with our feelings. And when we come in circle and we create that bond and that trust, a couple of the protocols is one of the protocols is when you say something, it's not attached to a person. It's now an idea separate from the person. So I would say, I really like maroon ties. I think maroon ties are the best. And then when it comes to you, you would say, on the topic of maroon ties, and to those who think they're better. So now we make it impersonal, right? Because when we make things impersonal, it takes off the intensity. So these are the types of protocols. And as people, what happens is people are going to see other people sharing vulnerabilities and watching how the circle handles it.
Yes. And this is where we have a breakdown in discourse because people immediately take the idea and attach it to the person,
Right.
and then insult the person, say they're stupid, say they're a moron, whatever. So we insult the person instead of the idea. And we need to be able to have that capacity to say, that's an idea that I don't like, and here's why I don't like it. That does not mean that I have to elevate myself above you, judge you, persecute you as a person for having an idea that I don't like. Because the truth is, if I'm really honest with myself, I've had ideas I don't like in my past, and those didn't wind up defining me for the rest of my life. So,
But if you what you're doing on the outside, you're doing on the inside. So you are persecuting yourself, and then now you project it on others as well.
yes, yeah, and I really, it's been frustrating. Like you said, since the really this has been going on for a while. I think social media has amplified it, but just our inability to be able to have discourse about ideas without it becoming personal. And I think this is something we've got to teach young people to do if we're going to save our democracy, if we're going to save our country, if we're going to have any kind of civility in future generations. They have to be able to talk about these things, but we're not modeling it for them. I don't think we're not seeing it modeled for kids very well.
No, we're not. And so, I mean, I'm not sure on our time, but the last thing I would say is, if I'm correct, we have about an hour.
Yeah.
The last thing I would say is find common ground before building bridges. If you cannot find common ground with the other person, you cannot hope to build a bridge. And in this theory, I would say that ultimately we're 80% similar. We have the same skin, the same bones, the same biology. Now, if we go beyond that, what's different is maybe our lifestyle and religion. Yeah, but if you break that down, all our lifestyles revolve around connecting around food. All our lifestyles revolve around common emotions, love, pain. All religion revolves around what happens at death. So now even that 80% has come to 90%. So that polarizing thing, at the end of the day, pretty much everybody wants the money they have made to be spent in a way that resonates with their values. If we can agree to that, we can understand why everyone is so fierce about how taxes are spent. It's not the part we're disagreeing with is like the 10%.
Right.
Everyone wants to protect their family. Everyone feels vulnerable when their family's in harm.
Right.
Can we all just kind of feel that emotion and understand the intensity around the argument around the right to bear arms? Now we can talk because now I understand you.
Yeah. Well, we could talk for a long, long time. I hopefully will have you back on at some point in the near future. But before we close out, wanted to give you an opportunity. If folks who are watching and want to get in touch with you to learn more,
Yeah.
what's the best way they can get in touch with you?
Can you give me 1 second? I should have been a little bit more prepared for that.
While you're ready, you just lift your finger when you're ready, and I'll just tell people that we would love to have you as a member of the South Carolina Education Association. If you're interested in joining our movement, go to jointhescea.org. That's jointhescea.org. You can find this webinar along with a bunch of other really cool resources on the cool website, cewl.us. That's www.cewl.us. We'll post all of that there. The retreat that we have been promoting has been sold out, but if you are interested in going, you can find information on that on the website and get on the waiting list if somebody cancels. So those are all that's the end of my promos there.
I'm almost there. I've got a landing page, and here it is. And my partner is going to kill me because I should have actually had this ready to go. Here it is. All right, and let's see. Here is the control copy. And
I'll say one other thing. Tomorrow night, we're going to have another webinar with Paige Selking, I think is her name, and Amanda Phillips from South Carolina NAMI. They're going to be talking about mental health. Thursday, we're going to have Andrea Lance from Discovery Education, who's going to be talking about those resources. So two good webinars coming up this week. Tomorrow at 7:00 on mental health. Thursday on Discovery Education resources.
So I just threw something in the chat box. Do people get to see that?
No, but I will put it in the Facebook post of this.
Otherwise, just contact me, thirdeyepraxis@gmail.com, thirdeyepraxis@gmail.com. And yeah, anything for educators, anything for youth. We're actually creating a new nonprofit. It's called the Project of Change. And we're going to provide all these resources to K through 12 schools and for educational reform for free. The idea is actually to empower the youth to create change in the schools because, quote, the adults have failed us. But if you're an educator and you want to be a student, contact me. I'll be happy to give you the resources around diversity, equity, inclusion, restorative practices, mindfulness, trauma sensitivity, and everything else that Todd and SCEA stand for.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Vikas. It's always good to see you. It's weird that we've only met in person once, but hopefully that will change moving forward. And I wish you nothing but the best. And if there's anything I can do to support your work, please reach out and we'll continue collaborating.
Yeah, y'all sign up for SCEA. It's awesome.
All right, everybody. Join the SCEA.org. Good night.